I was watching uh, this morning on YouTube a person who did a review of this Dake annotated reference Bible, which we, of course, talked about before. And his purpose in that review, which is quite long, was to go through that Bible, or this Bible, and show you all of those things in it which one can use. And of course, one thing about this Bible is that it has more things in it than any other single Bible has. Well, he went through, of course, many things. Then he came to the idea of doctrine. Now, I haven't looked at it that way before because I haven't come to that place in it. But he got to, of course, he showed what he's interested in is not only showing the notes that come with verses, and also the notes that will tell you to go to another place for a fuller understanding of what that verse says or even part of that verse. Well, the man who did this review this morning did that specifically, and he came to the idea of doctrine. Now, what he did, he went to the book of 2 Corinthians in the New Testament, and he said, go to 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and go to verse 13. Now, if we do that and we go to verse 13, what we're going to find there, if we look at verse 13, is this. This is what verse 13 says. It says here, but we are bound to give thanks always to God for you, brethren, beloved of the Lord, because God hath from the beginning chosen you to salvation through the sanctification of the Spirit and belief of the truth. So you see in that verse, there are two things going on. First is for chosen you for salvation. That means to be chosen. Now, that is a special meaning, of course, to be chosen. And also sanctification of the Spirit and belief in truth. Now, the man who did the review first said, let's look at sanctification because that's doctrine. And there's a letter Y just before the word sanctification. So, of course, you go down to the bottom or wherever the page, you find the letter Y and you look for it. And is there a letter Y? You see. Yes, it is. And here's what it says. The letter Y says, Y in bold letters. Now, this means that there's a section in it that deals just with that. This is bold letters, and it says, the doctrine of salvation. Go to page 406. So, we're going to leave this section now of Deuteronomy, second book, and we'll go to page 406. Now, this is typical of Dake, but now we're dealing with doctrine. And what does this say in this section right here? Well, Dake says very clearly in this section right here, the doctrine of salvation. And it says 2:13. Well, that shows just that one verse, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 13. All of what he says now has to do with just that one verse. Now, the first thing I read, which I thought was very interesting, first of all, it tells you the Greek word for that is hagios, consecrated, a separation unto God from So profane, secular, and carnal use to a sacred, religious, and spiritual use. Now, this is very interesting what he says here. I'm fascinated with this. He says, sin is not necessarily involved in sanctification because the word means setting apart. Material things and holy persons that are not sinful or that have had no old man in them can be and have been sanctified. If sin is not involved in a person or thing set apart, then no sin is cleansed of the person and of setting apart. But if sin and filth is involved in a person or a material thing to be set apart unto God, then such must deal with much be dealt with to make the person representing to God. Now, that right there, of course, is very interesting because the basic doctrine of much of Christianity is that because Adam sinned, we are all sinners simply because we are the offspring of Adam. We sprang out of him from I don't know how many years ago, but because we are that ancestor, we inherit original sin, whether we've sinned or not. Now, what Dake is doing here very clearly says that that is setting apart. And there are some who have no sin and not even had the old man in them. So therefore, they are set apart, and sin doesn't spoil that because there is no sin. Now, this contradicts the doctrine that we all sin because we are from Adam. Now, that to me is very interesting because that's a viewpoint of a person where there is such a thing as people who are sanctified because they are set apart. Now, that's something, of course, to be done. But being set apart, one can be without sin and not have to be lost and reborn or anything like that because they haven't sinned in the first place. Now, the rest of this is quite long, and it's almost 2 pages long of the rest of this. Now, what's this all about? It says material things like bread and all material things that have to do with that. 30 proofs when 30 proofs when sanctification begins. And you've got all of those proofs, then proof of progressive sanctification, and then proofs of complete sanctification. So you see, all of this deals with the doctrine of sanctification, and we have not dealt with the idea of doctrine in the Dake Annotated Reference Bible before. So that is a good clue of the idea of doctrine, and in this particular case, the idea that the doctrine of sin, which is considered by most Christian denominations to be absolutely correct of any human being, this contradicts that quite clearly, and I haven't even gone to the references in Scripture that he uses to make his point. But I may do that another time because I think this is one of the major points in Christian doctrine that needs to be dealt with.